software development is a craft and people know that they could be better, that there is more stuff to learn, that the suite of tools and frameworks available today is bigger and better than the suite that was available yesterday, and they want to progress and keep up. Training does not feel like a way of doing that to most people. Training generally feels like a box that has to be ticked for compliance, or an exercise that we have to go through because someone in another department said, you have to do this training, and so we do.
Hey, Luca here. Welcome to a new episode of the Refactoring podcast, where every 2 weeks we interview a world-class tech leader. Today's guest is Hywel Carver, who is co-founder and CEO of Skillerwell, which provides live team coaching for software engineering teams. With Hywel, we got deep into what makes traditional developer training awful, what engineers truly learn, and what they should learn. And then we explored how to measure the impact of learning and how AI may possibly change both how learning works and our own skills. So let's dive right into it. Welcome, Hywel. You are the co-founder and CEO of Skillerwell, which provides live team coaching for software engineering teams. And I'm a big fan of, I have to say. And so I'm excited to talk with you about developer training and education today, because this topic is very close to my heart, and I guess to yours as well, right?
Yeah, and firstly, Luca, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I'm very excited to be here. Always, well, as you know, always keen to talk about learning and what makes for good learning and how it happens, and everything else besides.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing is that I feel that refactoring works in kind of a similar space, right? I look at myself as working in education in a way. And I think there is so much that it feels like we are getting wrong when it comes to developing and training software engineers, and also so much that is possibly changing with AI. So it's an exciting time, if you may. So to break the ice, I always like to start by asking our guests about their journey in tech. So how did you even get into tech, and what did your journey look like before Skillerwell?
Yeah, I think I probably have to go back to when I was like 9, because I played a lot of video games, and I thought that video games were cool, and I wanted to be able to edit, create my own.
Yeah.
And my family bought a new computer, and I said, I said to the person we bought it from, like, I've heard about this thing called programming. What's the language that they use to make games? And this guy told me that they used a programming language called C, and he was
Yeah.
like, don't learn to program with C.
See,
And
but
I was
don't.
like, no.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Do it another way. And I thought, no, you have underestimated me. I will learn C. And so then I went to we had a specialist computer bookshop in the city where I lived,
Yeah.
and I bought Sam's Teach Yourself C in 21 Days,
Wow.
which I still think is a fantastic book. I'm sure it's been superseded massively now. And yeah, taught myself C from that.
So
Got
sorry,
access to a
you're
compiler.
telling me you started programming in C at 9 to 10 years old.
At 9, yeah. And my first program that,
Wow.
compiled and ran was guess the number. So it would pick a number from 1 to 100. You would type in on the command line a guess, and it would say higher or lower.
Wow.
And I had so much fun, just like putting in special things that if you said a certain number, it would just tell you the answer as a cheat. And it was like, that's like making little Easter eggs for myself. And this, as a 9-year-old, this was super fun. Go on, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just about to say it's incredible, and I don't know if there's anything you can say now that can top this story, whatever, because it's fantastic, really.
I mean, after that, I think my passions took me more towards the web. So
Yeah.
my school had an intranet, and I wrote my first website age 13 or 14, something like that.
Yeah.
Very bad HTML, mainly learned from looking how other websites had done stuff by inspecting their HTML. And this was all developed on, I guess with IE6 or IE7. So I'm guessing some people listening to this have never tried developing in those browsers, but
Yeah,
if
back
your
then.
JavaScript
Yeah.
if your JavaScript had a bug, or if your front end code had a bug, you could basically make the computer hang with just a series of alerts popping up in the browser window
Yeah.
that would just you just could never cancel them fast enough to get past it. And there's a very frustrating like cycle of being a developer.
Yeah,
And
and then I read you've been like a CTO many times, right? You have like more than a decade of experience in technical leadership. You have many roles, even as a consultant, right?
yeah, that's right. I mean, I studied something like data science, software engineering was what my
Yes.
degree ended up being in. I started a master's PhD program, which was in high performance computing, so simulating blood flow in the head on at peak 250,000 cores in parallel. That was super cool. Like
Wow.
the challenges of
It
writing high
is.
performance code in that way,
Yeah.
I really like. And then, since dropping out of that, I've been in a variety of startups,
Yeah.
almost always as a founding CTO, but I've also been a coaching CTO, so helping
Mm.
other CTOs and tech folks in place. And I would say once being an interim CTO. I don't like being an interim CTO. I find that very hard.
Yeah, I guess it is. And was it from all these kind of similar but different experiences as CTO that you started thinking something could be done better about how we develop our skills, how we train developers, how it came to be?
Yes, I mean, I don't think I know anyone who thinks that training is good. Uh, I haven't met anyone who's
Neither
like
do I.
training, hooray. Our gut response to it is it sounds like sitting in front of something boring, waiting for it to end and waiting to get back to real work.
Yeah,
And so actually, I think the inspiration is more that I feel like I have in my life seen good learning. So
yeah,
I was a student at Cambridge University. Most people, it's become very common for people to say that universities are rubbish and a waste of time. I think I was very lucky in that my university was actually really good and I learned a lot in my degree. That seems to be the opposite of most people's experience.
yeah,
But the reason, I think, is because as well as your lectures, you had problems to solve and you would sit down with a genuine expert who
mm,
understood the topic really well and learn from them. So it was never just dry theory. You were always using it in new and interesting ways under the guidance of someone who would help you
yeah.
understand the stuff that didn't land first time around. And it's more that I think I've seen that good learning is possible, that I don't understand why it isn't more widespread, that why we accept that training is rubbish. I don't know why we put up with it though.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. If I think about, if I have to guess about what most software engineers think when they hear like training, it's more like a corporate-ish thing, right?
Mm.
It's not the real deal. It's not how you learn things. It feels like something that is imposed, like top down, but it's not a real value to how you grow. I mean, the word itself, I think.
The word itself strikes fear into the heart. I my I don't think I've interviewed a software developer ever who doesn't say, I want to learn. There are too many negatives in that sentence. Let me rephrase it. Every developer I've ever interviewed says, I want to learn. I want
Yeah,
to grow. I want to get better. Software development is a craft, and people know that they could be better, that there is more stuff to learn, that the suite of tools and frameworks available today is bigger and better than the suite that was available yesterday. And they want to progress and keep up. Training does not feel like a way of doing that to most people.
yeah,
Training generally feels like a box that has to be ticked for compliance or an exercise that we have to go through because someone in another department said, you have to do this training. And
yeah.
so we do. It is in most places completely unrelated to growth and to improving and to honing our skills and honing our craft.
Yeah. And do you think, I mean, is it totally unrelated? I mean, is it the way it is today because the training material, the training devices, and the way we do this is bad, or it's vice versa, kind of a chicken and egg uh, problem? I mean, how did we get here? What do you think?
I I think it is a race to the bottom. And I think the reason it's become a
Mm,
race to the bottom is because we stop looking at outcomes. The outcomes people expect from training tend to be attendance rates, or if it's online training, like engagement rates, or
yeah,
like how many people turned up to session two, like day two after day number one.
yeah,
I was really disheartened recently, actually, where I saw someone I know who runs a training company that takes a more traditional approach, who posted online a statement saying that ultimately people just don't want to learn. That's why training is so hard. And I just thought, I think it's internalized, right? Because
yeah,
if you run that traditional training model, people don't want that training model, and that feels like people don't want to learn. Actually, people want to learn. It's just training is not really a mechanism to do that. And I think what often happens is you start out with someone who is smart and passionate and wants to share their abilities with other people, and they become really good at doing that. The
yeah,
question is, how do they grow and how do they scale? And at some point, most people give up on quality in some way, or they give up on the experience in some way.
yeah,
So they kind of compromise and say, well, in a room, I can make these people learn. I can help them. I can show them new stuff. For me to scale that, I'm going to have to record a series of videos and put that out into the world. To be
yeah,
clear, that does scale it. That is a worthwhile thing to do, but the quality of learning is going to be significantly lower
yeah,
compared to the people who are in the room getting your live feedback, getting your help in solving the problems in front of them and applying the ideas. So
yeah.
I think there is often a tension between scaling learning and effectiveness of learning.
Mm,
And in fact, some of the earliest meetings we had when we were kind of designing the Skiller Well approach was exactly how do we avoid that? How do we uh, manage to keep scaling without changing the quality of what we do and changing the experience, which is a hard problem, right? The general approach of turning it what is often an interactive learning experience into a passive one means that I can write a book and sell it at scale, or
yeah,
I can create a video and publish that and people consume it at scale.
yeah,
Keeping it interactive and scaling is the challenge that is kind of core to what we're solving, and
yeah.
most people avoid that.
Yeah, I can totally see it. I mean, if I just think about the stories you've told, right? You started describing your great experience at university, where one of the things or the main thing that made it great it was that you were pairing with somebody who was an expert, right? And then we said training in companies doesn't work. And when I think about training, I think about, self-serve courses or books or material to read in a way. And it's a completely different thing. And I can't honestly say you can fix this by just pairing people all the time, right? It's not the same thing. So it's not scalable the way you say. So it's about finding some middle ground or some solution that can accommodate for both things.
Right. And I think we were very lucky in that we had a existing model to copy. So at at university, what we had was lectures, but we also had these smaller sessions, supervisions, which would tend to be with a master student. So
Okay.
I had lectures from someone who has a Fields Medal, right? Who has it's like a Nobel Prize, but they only give it out every 4 years. So incredibly rare thing to get. And he was lecturing me. Now, when I don't understand something, when I can't solve one of the problems he sets, it's not him who helps me individually, but honestly, I don't need it to be. I need it to be like one of his PhD students, someone like that, who's sitting down with me, helping me to learn. And that's exactly what we had in our supervision sessions is PhDs, postgrads, people who are more kind of senior than us, but they weren't the professors, they weren't the people writing the courses. And those were the people who did the teaching, the feedback, helping you understand. And that is how you get really good education scaled. You need that kind of professorial brain almost in
Mm,
writing the learning materials. But the actual learning and the feedback, as long as the right structures are in place and the right kind of questions are being asked and the right application is being done, you just need someone who knows it and can explain it to you. And
yeah,
then you learn that skill by doing and getting feedback.
Yeah, and this experience you had in university was in small groups, like
Right.
coached by these older students, and I think it's interesting that sometimes maybe we think that to learn something truly, we benefit from getting access to the strongest expert we may find, right? But sometimes, I mean, even if I think about my career, there is an element of instead, I don't know if it's relatability or something that happens when you get in touch, you get taught or paired with somebody who is kind of close to your level, a little bit above, but not too detached, right? That understands where you are sometimes better than the Nobel Prize professor. I don't know.
Right. And the professor with the Nobel Prize, it's not a good use of his time, honestly, if there are other people who could explain it to me. Like,
Yes.
he should probably be, in this case, it was he should probably be training the like graduate students and maybe the like assistant professors, and then maybe they can help the rest of us learn. But I think there's something there's something about the idea of taking experience and accelerating it, because people do learn on the job. It's just slow, right? When
Yeah.
we have a job as a software developer, we learn stuff. We write a pull request, we get feedback, we pair with someone else. All of the time, we have the ability to learn stuff. It might not necessarily be the right stuff, and it might be not structured well, like not structured for learning. The learning kind of comes incidentally by accident next to the work. It's just slow. The time between being a junior and a mid-level developer is often 2 or 3 years, but realistically, there were probably 20 concrete things that you learn in that time, and they're 20
Yeah.
important things. But if you could take those moments, those kind of aha moments when something really just stuck for the first time, maybe you could dramatically accelerate people's abilities to grow and get more senior. Right? Maybe if you could work out exactly what those things were, you could get people way more skilled, way more fast,
Yeah.
if you could accelerate that experience process. And this is kind of what we've tried to do. And I think ultimately what that whole supervision model tries to do.
Yeah, and I think that's what people ultimately get discouraged about when they say training doesn't work. I mean, that I think that when somebody says training doesn't work, I think the most common follow up is you can only learn on the job, right? I mean, that's what
Mm,
people take from this. Uh, but I think if you stop, I mean, maybe in your current situation, that's true. But if you stop thinking, okay, but what makes it possible on the job? I mean, how does it happen on the job? And you try to bottle that magic in a way that is not only there, then
yeah.
you can stumble onto something. I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I make a distinction between different kinds of learning. One thing that I think we often fall foul of is this phrase knowledge learning, that suggests that everything is information, that all learning is just the passing of information from one
Yeah.
person to another. I don't think this is true. I think we can divide learning into knowledge, which is that information
Mm.
transfer, skills, which is the ability to do stuff, and wisdom. And I really think these are fundamentally different. But if we make everything look like knowledge learning, if we make it look like we just need to give you the information and then you'll be able to do stuff, we're going to be really disappointed, because you don't get new abilities just by listening to people who already have them, or reading the book of the
Mm.
person who already has them. On the other hand, wisdom, I think we get wisdom a bit by doing, but honestly, to get wisdom, you really have to do things multiple times and start to understand the context of when a different decision, a different approach was appropriate. So knowledge, information, really easy to pass on, really easy to put in a book, or in fact just Google for, right?
Yeah.
You can find information online. It's not hard. This is one thing that Google has really solved for us. Skills, the ability to do stuff, we have to do them ideally with feedback and support, but this is how we learn by experience, is by doing it.
Yeah.
Wisdom, I actually think podcasts are a fantastic mechanism for wisdom learning, because ideally, if I listen to multiple episodes of a podcast and I hear one person come on and say, we structured our code base like this, and this is what we saw. And then someone else in the next episode makes the same decision in a completely different way. You start to see the pattern that, well, in this case, their team structure looked like this, and their hosting looked like this, and their customers were like that. And that's why that decision was right for them. Whereas in
Yeah.
this other situation, a different decision is right. Understanding other people's experiences and the whys behind it, what behind them, is a fantastic way of growing your own decision making and your own ability to make better judgments in different positions. But this is completely different to skills, completely different to knowledge.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I'm glad you mentioned uh, podcasts and stories because I write a newsletter, right, and I write articles that give advice about this and that and various topics, and there's always, I think, this tension when I create this type of content between just writing about stories and providing examples of how people did this and that versus create trying to abstract some frameworks, and more
Mm.
general ideas about how things work. And I think I've come to think after many years that I think we kind of overrate the importance of frameworks because I think we are very good as humans at picking stories that even look different from our own situations and extracting the bits that really are useful for us. And then the story, with respect to the framework, has more context, has more nuance, more details. And so, yes, I mean, but I think I haven't always understood this.
I think you're right in that. So often frameworks are created by people who are very wise, to use my own terminology, right? Who have
Yes.
mastered their craft and have found ways of passing it on to others, who've
Yeah.
spotted patterns and who then condense their wisdom into knowledge for other people.
Yeah.
No framework is perfect, which means that the beauty of a framework is it gives you information that you can learn. Way easier to learn knowledge than to learn wisdom. But of course, at some point, we need people to really understand the framework, right? I can
Yeah.
tell you what the five solid principles are, but that doesn't mean I can apply them. And where there are
Exactly.
tensions between those principles, I don't like, unless I understand them really deeply, I can't really navigate those tensions well. I'm just going to kind of probably just choose a favorite principle and follow that one more than the other. And we still need understanding as we grow. So frameworks are very good when you are more junior, but as you get more
Yeah.
experienced, as your wisdom grows, you rely on them less because you just have that deeper level of understanding.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, I mean, I don't want to be misunderstood. I love frameworks and I create them all the time. I try to create them all the
Yeah.
time, but sometimes, and maybe it's about the fact that I'm growing older. I need more nuance for many things, and I look at individual stories. In a way, it's similar to when you read online advice about people saying, at some point, stop read like nonfiction books and read biographies. Right now there is
Mm.
this kind of trend, and biographies, I mean, on paper you think, why should I mean, especially biographies about people who are totally removed from what we do, but then you try, you read a couple and you see how many things, I mean, I wouldn't say all problems look the same after a while, and you learn from anything, but you learn surprisingly a lot, even from very different stories from your own.
Right, right. And what you're doing there, in my view, is you're growing your own wisdom by seeing
Yes,
the decisions and actions others take in different environments and the outcomes, right? You get to see that sort of feedback loop over
yes,
someone's entire career or lifetime or something.
yeah.
You start to it improves your own ability to anticipate and respond to whatever problems or challenges you face by understanding others.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to ask you, because we have hinted at this a couple of times during this chat. How Skill Whale works? I mean, how did you synthesize these ideas that you explained before into a process and a tool, of course, and a company that truly helps engineering teams in training?
Well, we really riff on that model I was telling you about,
Yeah,
where we see our job as giving. both the theory and the ability to practice in one place. Because what we want to do is accelerate experience. We want to accelerate learning by experience so that you grow in a matter of hours rather than years. And what that looks like is a coach leading a small group session, and who is going to talk through some new idea that you haven't come across before. Hopefully illustrate it with examples from their own work or their own career. And then throughout that session, there are going to be problems to solve that use the idea. And they're going to grow in complexity throughout the session. So we're going to, once we've taught the kind of most fundamental part of the idea, you then learn a kind of more advanced version or a nuance on it, or a situation where that idea actually won't work. But always with a usable example, with a realistic bit of code. If it's code that you're learning, realistic bit of code to run. If it's a management or leadership skill you're learning, with scenarios where you're going to give advice to a leader in a certain situation.
Yeah.
We believe quite strongly that people need to learn in small chunks, that you should learn a bit and then go away and have a chance to use it before you learn something new, which typically means our sessions are 60 to 90 minutes every 2 weeks.
Mm.
We really don't want to like throw loads of information at people that they immediately forget. We would much rather give people a new sort of micro bit of skill, if you like, go and use it, and then they come back to another session another couple of weeks later.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I think we do, which to me feels very obvious, but which I don't see other people doing so much, is we do a very granular assessment first to make sure that we aren't teaching anyone a skill they already have. So
Mm.
one of the reasons people get resistant to learning is because they think, I already know that thing. And
Mm.
if you're already a Python developer, growing your Python skills is hard because you're already good at Python. Most Python things you probably know about already. Most training courses will just bucket you into like
Yeah.
advanced Python, and there might be some new ideas in there, but there's going to be a lot of old ones as well. We go very granular so that we can tell whether you know this particular bit of Python syntax or this idea or this bit of the standard library, so that then the learning you do is just personalized to your individual needs. So
Yeah.
there might be other people on your team who are learning about function decorators, but you know about function decorators. So you're going to hold off until the session on coroutines or whatever it is. Excuse me. So by being really granular about that thinking, we can have everyone be learning something that is new to them and
Yeah.
not learning the stuff they already know.
Yeah. I think there are like two angles here about the fact that, especially when you learn through pre-made material, may or may not apply to you. I mean, one angle is many of these things maybe you already know, as you said. Another angle that is probably more from the perspective of the manager who greenlights this is how much of this do we really need? You mentioned, I don't know, advanced Python, and maybe you for what the team and the company needs to accomplish, there are only a few bits that are really important to know when it comes to advanced programming language. Uh, and I think that's another hard angle to figure out.
Well, I don't think it has to be hard. So
Mm,
one of the things we do when we put together what we call a coaching plan, which is really as
yeah,
close as we're ever going to come to doing a course. A coaching plan is a set of modules that the manager says matter,
yeah,
and then there's some subset of the team that needs each one. And sometimes I like Python as an example because we work with data science teams where often it's because they want to improve the performance of their code. They're not thinking in kind of like performance terms first, or maybe they want
yeah,
to increase code reusability.
yeah,
Sometimes we work with Python teams and there are a lot of junior developers who they want to get up to speed faster. There are a lot of senior developers who they want to just fill in gaps. Sometimes we work with
yeah,
Python teams and they're beginning a new project and they want to find ways of structuring it to minimize their technical debt, to improve extensibility over time. And for each of them, it can be an entirely different set of modules. So we've built what we do so that the list of modules any given team sees is completely different to the list of modules another team sees, which might mean
Yeah.
some team sees 5 Python modules on the solid principles, and you only see one because you're really strong on 4 of those principles already. And another company, they're all learning the real fundamentals of Python, or like the scalability of different data structures in Python.
Yeah, I love this because it feels like it starts from the actual, let's say, job to be done, right? Scalability in Python or solid principles. So you described the problem to me, like the junior Pythonists who create a code that maybe works, but it's slow or it's hard to maintain, and so it's not just a course in advanced Python. Let's say it's a course for when you need to scale your code base in Python, or a course to make Python faster. So is it how it works when you assess what a team needs?
Kind of, except you tell us which bits of going faster actually matter, or which bits of scalability matter, or which of those. We work with some Python teams that don't do any OOP, so everything is struct and every function
Yeah.
is side effect free, which it is not how I choose to live my life, but like some people like that.
To
And
each his
so,
own.
but for them,
Yes.
to each their own, right? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
For them, they see just the right modules for them. Like they don't have to have classes in there at all if they don't want to. But I think this comes back to the question of why we bother with learning. Like, what are the outcomes we
Mm,
expect to see? I think that traditional approaches to training are fantastic if the outcome you need is to check a box on a compliance statement. Like, because you're
mm,
PCI regulated or you've got GDPR obligations, you need everyone to be trained on these topics. A training course is a fantastic way to achieve that. If what you want is for people to go and explore their own ideas, to go and find the things that they're interested in that maybe they can't do as part of their work. Like,
yeah.
I had a JavaScript developer who became super interested in Haskell. I don't
Yeah.
want Haskell in my code base, but you can go and write some Haskell somewhere else, and I want to enable that for you.
Yeah.
And I think the e-learning is a great way of achieving that. My view is that learning, if done right, can be a second order benefit on basically everything.
Mm,
Learning doesn't add to velocity, it adds to acceleration. If you are learning, then you will just go faster all of the time you're learning, as long as you're learning the right things and learning them well. And over time, acceleration always wins. Yeah,
yeah.
if you plot a straight line graph and a quadratic graph, eventually the quadratic one overtakes the linear one. If you wait, depending on like the gradients of the lines, it will eventually happen. Learning always wins. The trick is to make sure that you are doing the right learning for what you care about. So the reason I call it second order is also because most organizations have some hypothesis along the lines of, we will make more money if, and that if
Mm,
might be, we improve performance of the site so people don't bounce off the homepage,
mm,
or we build these features faster so we compete with our competitors better, we compare more favorably, or maybe we build good AI enabled tools so that we can like get some, ride some of the wave of AI. The level below those things is learning. The way you achieve that faster performance is by learning to write more performant code on how to debug the performance of your existing code. The
yeah.
way that you enable AI in products that involve AI and do that well and safely is by learning how to use AI well and safely. And so this kind of measurement of outcomes comes back to why we learn in the first place, which comes back to why we have to target the learning.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the acceleration needs to be in the right direction. Otherwise, doesn't help you go faster in the way that you care about.
Yeah. I think, yeah, I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a technical leader who has this some type of technical challenge, right? And I think a hard thing to figure out is whether the gap you have towards what you want to accomplish, also in terms of expertise and skill of people in your team, is small enough that people can just go after it themselves and teach themselves whatever they miss, or it's more, I don't know how to call it, whether systemic or foundational, in a way that you are way faster at just pairing your team with coaching, with intentional resources for that, as opposed to leaving this to the individuals. How should one think about these situations?
Yeah. And I think that's a really important point, that sometimes people do have all the abilities that they need, and for other reasons they're not able to make the change that they want. Like maybe everyone knows how to write performance code and they know how to debug performance,
Yeah,
but they're constantly being told you're not allowed to work on that. You have to focus on the next item on the roadmap or whatever it
it's
is.
true.
And this is I think why it's really important that the leaders are present and guiding this stuff, because the leader of that team will probably know the reason for the bottleneck. If it's ability, then
Mm,
that might be something that learning can help with. If it's not ability, if it's that we're not able to focus on that, or we don't have good instrumentation, we don't have good observability. People didn't know that the code was running slow until our main customer, our biggest customer, came and complained to us. Then
mm,
those are the problems that we have to fix.
yeah,
One of the things that I see though is that people, when they sense a lack of ability, will very often hire their way out of it, or they
mm,
will they will outsource like parcels of work to people who they think do have that ability.
yeah,
And that to me feels like a very expensive and short-term way of getting things done. That's paying for velocity rather than
yeah,
paying for acceleration.
yeah. That's very true. I'm also thinking whether there is uh, an an ego trap and threat. Let's say you're an engineering manager. You sense there is an ability gap, and you need to go to your senior developers. Maybe it's junior. I don't know, and tell them, you know what, maybe you have to study this, or you have to let's try a program, however good it looks like. For a software engineer, I think that there are good and bad ways to receive this. uh, do
Mm.
you find this kind of situations in your work, and do you have an advice? I don't know.
I think one thing that we found really helps is actually the assessment process, surprisingly enough.
Mm,
Because if you are, I'm going to stick with my Python example, if you're a really great Python developer, you'll get loads of those questions right. You will have evidence that you're a really good Python developer.
yeah,
And there'll be a couple of things that you don't know. I am of the belief that, you know, in Python terms, there's probably Guido van Rossum who invented the language,
yeah,
and then there's the rest of us.
yeah,
And we all have things to learn between us and Guido. So if we can identify what those things are and just learn those, we're not going to waste any time. And honestly, I think good learning makes people feel awesome. I think good learning makes you feel like a superpower. It feels incredible.
yeah,
The reason people can have an ego-based reaction is often because the T word training gets used, and then they're like, right, so you're going to send me on an advanced Python course when I've been
yeah,
writing Python for 15 years,
and it's
which
painful.
feels very different.
Yeah,
It's painful, right? It feels very different to say, we think this is one thing that you don't yet know in Python. We think you could learn it. And this is how it's going to happen with someone else who also loves Python. It's a very different thing, I think. But
yeah.
ego can be a problem and it can be a barrier for
Yeah,
sure.
I think bad reactions are always then a mix of the ego side, and then you're wasting my time part argument, because of the instant reaction thinking about bad training materials. So yeah, I get it. And another question,
I,
yeah, no, you go on.
I was just going to say, I think that learning always requires curiosity
Mm,
and it requires vulnerability. It requires an admission that someone else knows more,
yeah,
and and being interested in what that more is. And most people I've worked with are able to do those things given the right setup, given the right guidance, given the sort of the right management of the situation.
yeah,
obviously, if a manager comes into the room and says, well, you're terrible, so we're going to send you on this remedial program,
Yeah,
that's not going to go well and does not encourage the vulnerability that's needed
exactly.
for learning. But we think things are going fantastically. Things would be even better if we knew this, you were good at this other area, and we found a great way to learn it. That
Yeah.
that generally excites people.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And another thing that I was thinking is that one of the reasons why training materials and training programs get so little attention is that I think they're usually completely detached from measurable results or impact that a company can measure out of them. Uh, do you think there's a good way to measure the impact of learning for tech skills that we have mentioned? Or should we even measure something that is specific to this as opposed to just looking at the business results we achieve?
I think there should always be a measure for learning.
Mm,
Um, I think that the what that is will vary by the learning though. So again, I because I'm thinking about as an acceleration, and I think it is always a means to an end to improving some other metric that we care about.
yeah,
Sometimes that measure looks like, you know, the P99 for our response times from our backend application dropped by 10%. So everything got faster by 10%. That might be the measure for what you're looking at is for performance. We worked with a customer where what they really wanted was velocity. They saw that their teams were facing a barrier to being effective and to being fast because everyone was having to talk to everyone else to ship anything.
yeah.
And they wanted everyone to become API first. And to get serious about that, we worked with them on how to design RESTful APIs
Mm,
thoughtfully and well. Like everyone there had worked with RESTful APIs before, and most of them had built them, but I think they hadn't thought about them in a sort of structured and formal way. And as a result, I think their cycle time dropped by to 40% of what it was, and their velocity increased by 230 odd percent, something like that. There is always a measure if we're targeting the learning. My beef
yeah,
is with the learning organizations who say everything's going brilliantly. 73% of people logged in last quarter. I I mean, it just doesn't matter, right?
yeah,
What we could do is reset everyone's passwords and they'd probably log in every quarter. It's not a meaningful
yeah.
outcome. And honestly, 73% is extraordinarily high for e-learning. I think an average is like 13% course
Mm,
completion in the e-learning space. And I think that's just a reflection of the fact that it is just like hard work that doesn't really get you what you want. It doesn't get you the learning outcome that you need. So that what I guess what I'm saying is I think there's loads of ways of measuring learning, but it really matters to actually pick ones that you care about.
yeah,
Um, can I talk a little bit about a case study that we are doing? But I should
totally.
warn you,
Go
it
for it.
touches on the topic of AI,
Yeah.
which we've managed to steer away from
Yeah,
this long.
so far, but I was ready. Yeah, go with it.
Yeah, exactly. It's always there, like lurking in the background, isn't it? Like
Yes,
every
yes,
conversation tech
yes.
leaders have in
Yeah.
the last 2 years, it's
Actually,
like,
actually, it made my own podcast preparation so much easier. I always have these like fallback questions, like, and how does it all change with AI now?
yes,
Whatever the
yeah,
topic is, and it always works.
yeah, exactly. Until you find someone whose whole topic is AI, and
Yeah.
then your question of how does AI change with AI
Yeah.
won't work
Which might
anymore.
still, work in some philosophical sense and throw some people off. Yes.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, as a meta
Yes.
question.
Yes.
Um, so we are partnering with DX, who I'm
Yeah.
sure you know well,
Yes.
to measure the impact of not just use of AI, but being able to be good at AI. So we have a
Mm,
curriculum on using generative AI in the software development lifecycle. We're trying hard to go beyond just tips and tricks and giving people like mental models for the systems that they are using and building, having developers deeply understand how these tools are built and therefore how they should use them effectively in all kinds of different ways. And we are working with the X to measure what that does to the metrics of a team.
yeah.
Productivity. I was in a roundtable discussion just this morning, actually, about productivity in engineering. And I think the conclusions we came to as a group are: it's hard. There's no one right answer. It's trade-offs all the way down. If a metric starts being a target, it starts being a terrible metric. It stops being useful in that way. One of the things I'm really interested to see is a holistic evaluation of the effect of using AI and the effect of being good at AI. Like,
Yeah.
I expect velocity to increase. I think the effects on developer satisfaction might be really surprising as well. And I think the effect on flow, one of the things I find when I'm using AI to write code for me, which I do occasionally. I don't write code a lot anymore, but I have like side projects that involve
Yeah.
writing code. It works really well around meetings. It works really well as a sort of like, I'm going to fire this thing off and come back to it later.
Yeah.
In terms of getting in the groove, in terms of that flow, in terms of this mind space where I feel most productive writing code, it's really disruptive to
Yes.
that. So we want to see the overall patterns, what it does to productivity when people go from just having access to the tools to being shown how to use them well and given the ability to use them well.
Yeah. I think it's very early and we are still figuring out many things. First of all, I want to go back to something that I think it's very important when you mentioned how to measure value. And the takeaway that I get from your take is that the closer you can bring talking about the training, the education to the actual, business goals and what you need to achieve, the easier it gets to measure the value. And of course, because you can tie it to what you want to achieve for which you're doing that. And so in a way, when I look back at the bad training examples that are more like perks, right? That the fact that they have no impact or no value becomes kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you provide generic things that are not tied to anything, then how you measure things, how you measure anything really. So that point really got me thinking. And speaking about AI, actually, of course, I'm in a similar situation of yours, and I don't have like an engineering team anymore or a big code base, but I have plenty of side projects. And I find that when it comes to the state of flow, the experience of writing code, it's disruptive and I enjoy it less. But,
Mm.
but am I more productive overall? I say for sure I am, because of many things that I did not anticipate before. The fact that when I'm doing something else, I can keep this thing running in background, like Claude Code doing its own thing, and I give him feedback every now and then. I mean, that is to say, workflows are so we are still so early, and we might figure out that the best way of using these things, it's completely different from what we have been doing so far. I mean, just look, 6 months ago, the the number one way everyone was using this were AI augmented IDEs. And in a way, it's still kind of is, but there are many people who now switched to a more of a CLI workflow, which I would have totally not anticipated if you asked me like 6 months back. So I guess nobody knows.
I think you're right that no one knows. I think no one knows if we will how the abilities of the underlying LLMs will progress, right? Because that will very much change how we how we use these tools best.
Yeah,
Will really be dependent on how much freedom and license we should give the code generation tools themselves.
yeah,
My own experiences with it have really all been on quite small and unimportant code bases. So, for example, I have a friend who maintains a digital implementation of a board game, and the map didn't load when I loaded the page, but it did when I resized the page. And so I did a little bit of debugging in the browser. I had a hunch of why that would be. But the code behind this app is all like it's HTML generated in Kotlin.
yeah,
Seems like a weird way to do things to me. But I just asked the LLM, does this seem like the right problem? Can you write a fix for it? And verified it, and it seemed to work. We as a company have a fork of a board game that we play a lot as a company as a sort of social activity,
Yeah.
that works via a Slack bot, which I now maintain. It used a dependency I didn't much like. It was all written in a reactive style, and I didn't know. Yeah, I don't think I knew reactive programming well enough to make changes, but also I feel like the changes were just harder because of the style it was written in.
Yeah.
And so I worked out a like multi-point plan of how I was going to strip this dependency out bit by bit, but in very small chunks, leaving it in working state at each stage. So I still felt like I was doing the sort of senior developers
Yes.
thinking,
Yes.
um, and was reviewing at each stage the work of a junior who could translate between RxJS and promises. And sure enough, over like 20 commits, which I probably spent 5 minutes on each commit myself, and Claude did all of the hard work for me, we stripped the dependency out. People's willingness to go to a CLI versus an IDE, I think, depends on the size of the change that you're making, how much you trust it to make the right change, how often you're throwing away
Yeah.
changes. All of that kind of comes together. It probably is affected as well by the code base that you're using. But certainly I think humans are going to be in the loop for the foreseeable future. I know we've just passed at date of recording the 6th-month anniversary of Dario Amodei saying that in 6 months 90% of code will be written by AI, and I don't think we're at 90% of
No,
code today.
I don't think we are anywhere close.
So the progress is definitely slower than at least some people are
Yeah,
predicting.
but at least, I mean, that's the problem with usage metrics. I mean, if you want AI to write 90% of your code, you can do it. So that's what makes it a bad measure, right? That is, we shouldn't look forward to just measuring how much code AI writes, because I might have a terrible team. They don't know how to do anything. They make AI write 90% of the code, but that doesn't say much about how good AI is at writing code. Then, of course, it makes for a good headline, so I understand that we need to simplify things a bit, but it's a little bit misleading to me.
Right. I think this is why we need to look holistically. And it's honestly why I'm excited about the study we're doing with DX,
Yeah,
because it's going to be very broad in the statistics we look at. I'm
yeah,
interested to know, does productivity in terms of velocity or PRs or some measure of work being
exactly.
done, tickets closed, does that increase? Does code churn increase? Like recent studies have found
Exactly.
a 7% increase in codes being churned over because of AI
Yes.
generation. These things matter more to us than fraction of code written by AI, which, as you say, we could make 100% of our code written by AI today, but we would see a load of other metrics change for the worse.
Yeah. Is it changing already, from your point of view, the type of skills and skill gaps people are going after in programs like in Skiller Whale versus things that now maybe there are gaps that AI is now filling and people don't feel the need to train? You see, we got finally to the question, is it this changing with AI? Yeah.
Yeah. So in the very short term, definitely yes. I
Yeah.
think one of the changes that is really clear is we're seeing loads of teams who get access to an AI tool and they don't see the kind of promised land of massively increased productivity, and then we get asked to upskill them on using AI tools well. So in the
Okay.
short term, there is a need to get better at these skills. The longer term, I think, looks like a return to more fundamental understanding, because I think we move away from needing everyone to be able to write the code and essentially everyone becoming a reviewer.
Mm.
At least in the foreseeable future, what happens is we need developers to be very sensitive to badly written code, security problems, all of the things that maybe previously people would just kind of leave to review, or like they would assume a more senior developer would look at in review.
Yeah.
Now that we're not writing code, we can focus more on those fundamental principles, almost like computer science. My analogy for this is pilots. So a modern pilot of a jumbo jet has an incredibly complex machine, right, in front of them that will do a load of automations for them. Your plane has an auto throttle and an autopilot, and it can follow various forms of navigation. It can do a lot, and they have very kind of granular controls in order to get the plane working in exactly the right sort of configuration that they need. But whenever there is an emergency in a plane, whenever those systems break down, pilots can fall back on a very strong fundamental understanding that they have, because every pilot understands about lift and drag and thrust and like weight and how those things are balanced. They understand about like roll and yaw and the dynamics of a plane. They understand how all of the systems fit together. So pilots are trained on the nature of the autopilot, and when the autopilot will switch itself off and the different modes, they have an incredibly good understanding of their tools on a fundamental level, and of the machine itself, probably much more than most people would appreciate. They're really not just kind of pushing buttons on something they don't understand. Pilots really know their machines inside out. And I think that might be what the future looks like for us. Less manual flying and more of a very deep, fundamental understanding of the tools and the systems we're working with.
I love this analogy. And if I may add another spin also to it, I think that what makes me hopeful about this AI augmentation is that I think that in the past 10 to 15 years, our technology stacks became more complex. I wouldn't say overly complex. I mean, I'm not gonna say any of this, but for sure more complex than before, and which led to a lot more specialization, a lot more layering, and so engineers owning more and more a small slice of things. So to go with your analogy, it's like the number of buttons in the cockpit became so high that no single pilot could remember all these things, and we got many pilots to drive the same plane. And so I'm excited because the cognitive load is too high. But by doing so, I think we lost some of the system thinking and some of the big picture thinking that is what makes engineering great and rewarding. And so I look forward to AI taking care of some of this cognitive load, all the technical details, syntaxes, DSLs, and letting engineers do more things. I mean, own more, broader parts of products, and maybe undo some of the layering, because I think it's ultimately more fun and more rewarding.
Yeah, I think that's right. And in fact, I think that actually extends the analogy I was talking about before, because the problem modern pilots face is not that they have too many buttons. They know what all the buttons and all the dials mean in a very fundamental level, but they don't have to manually fly the plane for large amounts of time.
Exactly.
The plane flies itself, and they can monitor and they can check that things are correct because of that deep understanding. And I think that's the future that we're heading for.
Yeah, I really, really hope for. So thank you so much, Hywel. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I love this chat.
It's been a real pleasure. And yeah, thank you so much for having me, Luca.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this chat valuable, you can subscribe to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find the show. You can find all past episodes and learn more about the show at refactoring.fm. See you in the next episode.